I'm Bob Costanza from the Institute for Sustainable Solutions, and we're very happy to have with us tonight Dr. Madhu Verma. She's an ecological economist and a professor of environment and development, as you can see here from the Indian Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal, India. She's a biological science graduate, and she has a master's in regional planning and economics and a PhD in industrial economics from Bhopal University. She's been a visiting professor at the University of Massachusetts and the University of Berkeley, University of California in Berkeley. And her interests are very broad around this issue of ecosystem services and their valuation, including economic valuation of natural resources, conservation finance. She's been working for 28 years, and she mainly does action and policy research. Many of her findings and her research have been used in decision-making by the government of India. She has a rich experience of work in the Himalayan states of India and with many other international and national organizations. And she's worked with the TEEP study, which you probably heard of, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. She's been a co-author on several of their chapters and been coordinating the Indian TEEP study. So join me in welcoming Madhu. She's also a visiting Fulbright scholar here at the Institute and will be around for the next several months on her visit. So if you have some follow-up questions after her talk, you'll know where to find her. So join me in welcoming Madhu.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Bob, for a very generous introduction. What would have been more delighting or heartful for anybody to get being introduced by Bob, and I'm so happy that he introduced me here to the audience. Well, I'm also thankful to him for accepting me as Fulbright Fellow here. I'm visiting here to do some work in the area of climate change, adaptation and mitigation issues, and conservation environmental finance. Besides also getting his input and his team's input in my current and ongoing work on evaluation of protected areas and forests, and also doing a bit of forest carbon modeling of some sort. I'm also thankful to Jennifer Ellen, the director of ISS, and the entire very warm and very bright team of ISS for feeling me at home within 2 weeks of time of my visit here. And I've been having a great time with all of them, and I'm looking forward for having a great learning with the entire team, and also looking forward to have more interaction with the faculty and students of Portland State University. Well, coming to Portland has been an added advantage for me, a kind of a bonus. I come from a city of Bhopal, which you all would have heard about in a bad sense, I must say. It brought to the international notoriety because of the Union Carbide's gas leak case way back in 1984. And still the impacts of that disaster could be seen, could be felt. And I myself had gone through that horrendous process of, smelling the gas and trying to make oneself survive. And eventually we survived, but definitely many people died. But people don't know that Bhopal is a city which is also quite similar to Portland. It's a city of hills, city of lakes, city of lots of water, lots of greenery. And it's an amazing place to be there. And I will definitely invite you all, if you have a chance to visit Bhopal, do come over to Bhopal city. I've heard a lot about Portland State and Portland city itself, the university and the city, and heard a lot about the kind of initiatives being taken by large number of groups to manage this urban area very well. In India as well, there has been a lot of stress on development of rural areas, enriching them, bringing people above the poverty line. But in the process of giving too much attention to rural areas in the agricultural sector and the industrial sector, we to a great extent forgot the urban areas. And now we have begun the process to revive urban areas. We've got lots of schemes. It will be very nice to actually have learning from Portland itself to how to involve people, how to have lots of forums, because I've heard this is supposed to be the most democratic place so far as decision-making process is concerned. So I'm really looking forward to also join some of the forums to have great learning out of all such processes. So thank you very much once again, and I must not forget Shepresa, who actually motivated me to give this presentation. You all know that it was to be done by a faculty member of ISS. Because of some reasons he was not able to make it. And I'm very thankful to her for giving me this opportunity to come here to make a presentation about ecosystem services, valuation, accounting, its internalization in the decision-making process in the Indian scenario. Well, I'll not be talking much about how valuation is being done. I will talk more about how we have taken the evaluation exercise that we have done in Indian context forward to actually enrich the policymakers, their knowledge, expanding their knowledge base, giving them much more information such that they can have well-informed decision-making process. It has been so happening that we were making lots of policies, taking lots of decisions on a narrow knowledge base, and eventually policies have been failing. We always made policies with good intentions, but they many a times had bad outcomes, and we used to ponder why it happened. Why we intended to have some good outcome, we wanted to achieve something, but it did not happen. And it did not happen because of weak institutional mechanisms, weak market mechanisms which existed in the scenario. So we just wanted to blend together, and we use valuation as a tool to actually correct these kinds of failures in the system. We have policy failures, we have institutional failures, we have market failures, and valuation comes as a very strong tool for us to actually bring about changes in the scenario and make the failure stories into success stories. Well, I've titled this presentation purposely as compensation and rewards for forest ecosystem services, because we had done some work in the past and realized that number of words are being actually interchangeably used, like payment for ecosystem services, compensation, rewards, incentives, these kinds of, and we think that they're all the same. But it does make a difference when you use a specific word in a developing country's context. The moment you say payments, people deter to come forward, join the process, and they think that they will always have to pay. They don't realize that when they are involved in the conservation process, they can also receive some incentives, some kind of benefits in exchange. So after doing lots of pilot studies in India, we realized that we should not use this word payments. We rather use, even for the people who are going to pay, incentive would be a better word, because when they realize, they look at the connect which would be happening on account of conservation in certain areas, maybe upstream areas, and they get the benefit in exchange, they would be willing to pay for something which we were actually wanting to do, but we intend not to use this specific word payment in our context. So when a difference is being made, why not actually reward a person for making the difference in terms of provisioning of ecosystem services? Or when you have to forego something, why not compensate a person for foregoing his own resources? A typical case of property rights comes into being. When you would like to access something, you have to make a payment to access the property. When you have to part with your property, you must receive something next in terms of compensation. So that is the scenario in which actually we conduct work, and we find that this kind of process of compensation and rewards has greater acceptability as compared to using this mechanism, which is definitely it is best process, but we use it in a little different fashion. I would like to give you a bit of background of the policy scenario in Indian context, which are kind of building blocks of my presentation. We have been talking a lot about conservation versus development. We think that if we conserve an area, we will forego development. But we don't realize by conserving an area, we're enriching the natural resource base, enriching the natural capital. And that provides a base for developmental activity. So we are trying to change this kind of mindset amongst people, amongst policymakers, amongst the users, amongst different set of stakeholders to understand it is only when you conserve you have available stock in the next cycle for developmental activity. So that's the first kind of step we instill in the process of effecting so-called PES in the country. In case of any developing country, or specifically in case of India, there's a strong dependence of people. We'll demonstrate through some figures in later slides. Huge dependence of people for their livelihood security. They earn their livelihoods, their money income. They are dependent hugely upon these natural resources. And it is only when we actually secure these ecological systems, we'll be able to secure or ensure about livelihood security of people. So one has to actually strongly demonstrate this connect amongst the mindsets of people, the users of resources, that it is only when you conserve resources you will be able to get benefits in future, and you will be ensuring or securing your livelihoods in future. Then we also realized that the planning in the country, in India, has been quite centralized to great extent for till many years ago. But we realized that it is, what we had been doing, we have been developing policies, setting instruments, so for example, a tax is being imposed in a city or in an economy. Say for example, environmental tax. But without giving knowledge to people why it is being imposed and what it is going to actually achieve. Without consultative process, you're doing work for people, but without involving these people in the process of, implementation of an activity or a program or a process. So we hugely believe now in terms of consulting all concerned stakeholders, taking them into stream, and then taking ultimate decision, for which I'm really looking forward to have more learnings in Portland City. And then decision gets acceptable to everybody when you finally implement something in the process. There has been lot has been discussed, and I have been just watching previous presentations discussed about various kinds of ecosystem services emanating from ecosystems. We have been discussing a lot about provisioning services in our planning process, which are more visible, more tangible, can be felt, can be weighed, and we didn't realize what is happening behind the curtain in terms of regulating services, in terms of cultural services. There's been a major shift in the country to talk more about regulating services, because we've realized the connect of conservation and emergence of huge area of ecological services, which are regulating services, which control the mechanism, especially the forest and water connect is very strongly demonstrated in Indian context. Similarly, we have got wonderful mechanisms since ages in terms of indigenous knowledge-based mechanism, in terms of our cultural values, in terms of lots of religious beliefs, myths as well. For example, we have sacred groves, we have sacred ponds, we have got sacred forest. We worship many trees. These are natural ways or religious ways as well to conserve resources. And we are using such areas where such beliefs are being strongly practiced to generate this mechanism of returns for their efforts for conservation, of course through religious belief, but why not also get something in exchange through this best process. Then taking forward the TEEP studies, outcomes, which all of you, I think most of you would be aware of. As Bob just mentioned that there had been an international study on the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. It talked about ecosystems and biodiversity separately, which is very clear. It was very strong in using this kind of a combination. So just saying ecosystem services or ecosystems economics, it talks about ecosystems economics, what you get out of an ecosystem as it is. And when you enrich an ecosystem through its biodiversity, which creates more resilience, more strength into biodiversity to have great absorption capacity of shocks, changes. That's why you have to work out the biodiversity value or economics separately. And it had put in front very strongly promotion of ecological infrastructure versus the man-made infrastructure. And the example of tsunami, example of all the hurricanes that you are facing in the US as well, to understand where you have natural shelter-built mechanisms, protection systems like mangroves, and you can protect those areas better as compared to constructing artificial dikes, which with one stroke get collapsed completely, and you don't get anything in it. Rather you feel more devastated as compared to what you were without these man-made infrastructure. So we are strongly putting this also in our planning process too, and then telling people why does it make sense to invest in natural capital. We have had enough of investment in all other kinds of capital, like human capital, in physical capital, in financial capital, in social capital. But there's an urgent need to invest enough in natural capital, because without that, nothing can actually survive, nothing can happen in future. And then we are using ultimately, for which the entire talk is actually focused, valuation as a tool to substantiate above statements. And that's what I said. And TEEP gave a very interesting punchline, said that measuring what we're trying to do through valuation, we're trying to measure what we manage. And we add another M to it, not Madhu, of course. We add monitoring to it, measure, manage, and then monitor as well. Because valuation is not just one point of time exercise. It should not end with just valuing resources at one point of time. It should carry on in future to ensure about so-called flows from an ecosystem. So that's why we need to monitor how we will be able to actually provide service not just today, not just tomorrow, but in perpetuity. So that's what we do in measuring, managing, and monitoring ecosystems. And then we're establishing this PES process, which I use as CRES, compensation and rewards for ecosystem services. And we use certain, kinds of, statements and punchlines. A very interesting work done by one of our students who is now doing his PhD in Cambridge. A popular article was written in a newspaper, which was titled as Selling Forests, Not Trees. That's what we try to achieve through payment for ecosystem services. We don't fell forests, we don't fell trees, they're still standing. But we are getting revenue out of it by selling actually its ecosystem services. And there has been tremendous mindset change, tremendous change in terms of thinking of planners, politicians. And they're also realizing that if you are asking us to remain green, I'll explain you why, you must give us something in exchange. You must incentivize us for remaining green. In India, it so happened, it was somehow through intensive research in forestry sector realized that we must maintain 33% of our geographical area under forest cover. You should have forest cover in the 33% of our geographical area. And the forest area which is notified by the Government of India as forest area, which is legally defined as forest area, where actually which is being commanded or managed by the Department of Forest, is not 33%. It is much less than that. And we have to achieve the 33% ambitious, target. You require investment for that purpose. You have to do a lot of forestation, a lot of afforestation to be done. You've got huge degraded areas which can be again revived, recharged, can be forested. But from where the money would come? If you look at our own contribution, I'll show you through slides. We contribute very small amount in terms of black and white. If you look at the accounting system of the country, we seem to have been contributing only 1% through forestry sector. And planning has always been, not just in India, in all countries on quid pro quo basis. The more you contribute or the amount you contribute, you tend to make your case of receiving in exchange allocation of budget. And since we just have been showing only 1% contribution, we're getting almost 1%. And look at the target we have to achieve, 33% of the geographical area under forest and tree cover. It used to be forest cover. It means in the legally defined forest area, you have to generate this forest cover. But we didn't have that much area under the command of the department, so we added this tree cover as well to our target. Now we have FTC, forest and tree cover, which are the trees grown outside the legally defined forest area, and we can achieve this particular target. But when you ask people, when you ask stakeholders, ask different firms, different individuals, different communities, to do that, why should one do that? What should you get in exchange? So we are actually promoting this kind of, paradigm in the system, or mindset is being towards incentivizing people such that you can achieve this ultimate target of 33% of forest and tree cover. So I was trying to tell you, there's a very small contribution being right now recorded. Only timber which is being traded, some amount of non-wood forest produce, and nothing else. The huge ecological contribution being made by the sector in terms of watershed benefits, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, macroclimatic features, and so many, employment, livelihoods. Nothing is being actually captured, and we also earn a lot through the ecotourism, or rather the tourism in forest area. So, like if you Google India's site, two things are being actually flashed. You see Taj Mahal and you see tiger. And we have many tiger sanctuaries, tiger reserves in the country, but you require a huge amount of funding to keep these areas intact, such that not much poaching is being done. You're able to contain your tigers such that you can achieve tourism targets in future and currently, and you earn revenue out of it. So that's why we need to actually demonstrate the true contribution of forest in the economic system, and then accordingly claim, prepare a case for equal amount of, or maybe proportionate amount of contribution or reward in terms of revenue allocation to different states. Another thing happening very interestingly in the country, that lots of areas, India is a developing country, we require huge infrastructure development. You need to construct roads, you need to construct bridges, you need to construct public schools, and a couple of such constructions have to be done, multi-purpose dam projects. We have got large number of diamond mines as well, which are actually hosted by or housed by forests. For all such purposes, forests have to be diverted. But if you look at the way of taking a charge for forest diversion, it is peanuts. It is very small value being charged from individuals, and because we didn't have, again, a system of demonstrating the true value loss on account of diversion. So two things have been simultaneously happening. It's like burning your candle from both the ends. You reflect less contribution, you receive less amount of budgetary allocation, have to achieve huge target of 33% forest and tree cover, huge dependence of people for livelihood purposes. On the other hand, you let forest diversion happen and you charge less and less amount of money. So this particular kind of, scenario led to generation of system of valuing forest ecological services in the country. Now, the idea here is it's not that many things are being provided to us, like we are not charging for oxygen that you get from forest. We're not charging from, many times you just take a stroll, take a walk, like I know in US, places are known for it, they are miles drive, 17-mile drive, or 10 miles drive, or 20 miles drive. You enjoy the landscape beauty, changing colors of leaves of trees, and you don't pay anywhere. But that's what I'm trying to say. We do, but not that you must not value that kind of landscape value or landscape beauty of the sector. The idea here is to generate an appreciation of ecosystem services amongst all stakeholders, that you get so many things out of it, you must maintain, must conserve these resources. And to do, of course, you have to inform, like the policy maker is deciding about the forest diversion cases. One has to inform him that this much value should be charged for diversion, not this small amount of value. Because you're losing, not just standing trees are being lost when you divert forest. There's a cascading impact occurs on the downstream areas, on the neighboring areas. The global benefits are also lost when you actually clear forest at one site. So how to actually capture that? So we intend to do full cost valuation, price-based valuation, or value the various approaches of valuation, to have larger body of knowledge for informed decision making, to reflect real value of investment in the sector. Through the 1988 forest policy, we effected decentralized mechanism of management of forest resources in the country. We created many joint forest management committees, but they were given only minuscule benefits on account of associating themselves in the conservation process. Just some timber benefits, some non-wood forest products benefits. But when they conserve areas jointly, gradually shifting towards community-based forest management, they generate whole array of ecological services as well. Develop a mechanism to compensate them, reward them for conserving these. That's why they will actually also think that they should invest not in money terms, but in their terms of their time, in terms of their effort, and also sector for investing in the sector, investing in forestry sector, the financial sector to come forward and invest in the forestry sector. Because now we never thought about carbon markets couple of years ago, but there's a huge spurge in carbon markets in the international map. Similarly, biodiversity premiums, biodiversity markets, watershed markets, couple of such markets are coming into being. So why not actually get a return on your investment through these ways and processes? And then setting appropriate instruments to generate environmental and conservation finance. Valuation is just one tool in the whole toolkit. You have to use a specific instrument to convert this valuation into means of earning revenue, means of compensating and rewarding people. I hope many of you would have seen this kind of a linkage diagram, which is being put up by DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs of UK, which makes a very strong connect between the policy process and the evaluation exercise. You are affecting a policy in the system. A policy tends to bring about a change. It might change from production forestry to conservation forestry. It has an impact on ecosystem. It has an impact on ecosystem services. It has an impact on human welfare. Eventually, you can capture the value of human welfare through economic valuation exercise. So you have to demonstrate the connect between a particular policy intervention. Eventually, you achieve it through valuation process. I'll just be giving you a little more background about the decision-making process, how it is happening in our in Indian context. As I said, the 1988 forest policy shifted the whole paradigm from production-oriented forestry to conservation-oriented forestry. It also involved people in the decision-making process by establishing joint forest management committees. At the same time, during 1995, as I said, somehow this magic number was worked out, the 33% of area to be under forest and tree cover. And to achieve that, an order was issued and a policy also prescribed that there should be ban on green felling in the high altitude areas. Areas above 1,000 meters and above, there will be no felling at all. And in the hill areas, they have to maintain their two-thirds of their area under forest and tree cover. At the same time, when you put a ban on green felling, you are constraining the states which are otherwise having rich forest resource. They would have earned huge amount of revenue on account of these rich forest resource, but you're constraining these, their fiscal capabilities to generate revenue. And there was no mechanism to compensate and reward these states for not felling trees and losing their entire revenue. But a good thing happened, In between, a couple of studies were done and which triggered the interest of policymakers in these hill states on doing valuation exercise and claiming compensation based on the valuation exercise findings. So it triggered a lot of interest in ecosystem services besides so-called timber and because timber felling was banned in these areas. Then an economic instrument which was introduced based upon the work that we had done way back in Himachal Pradesh state, which is one of the hilly states, the Himalayan state of India. An instrument was introduced called as CLEV. When you're diverting forest for non-forestry purposes, you don't have to just pay on the basis of the standing value of timber, but on the basis of the whole ecological value loss. And that greatly, constrained the huge, demand which was coming for the purpose of diversion. And when forests were diverted, we tried to work out the whole ecological loss value such that not just you do forestation elsewhere to achieve the same biomass what you were getting earlier, but also you tend to compensate people whose benefits get lost. Couple of other ecological impacts which might occur, which need to be mitigated. Damages have to be actually cured, so it should be used for that particular purpose. Couple of studies are actually introduced by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Then we also have had, for the first time in the country, a comprehensive environmental policy. We had couple of policies, many policies, for every sector had a policy. Forest sector had a policy, industrial sector had a policy, transportation sector had a policy, energy sector had a policy, but never all the policies were actually put under one umbrella. And it was so happening that one policy tries to achieve something, other would actually cancel off its effects. Like forest policy tried to achieve the target of 33% forest area under forest and tree cover. It was to be achieved by 2010. But so many things were happening together that lots of demands were coming for diversion purpose. It could not achieve so. So there were lots of cancelling effects happening within the entire economic system. So to curtail that kind of practice, this environmental policy came into being and gave a very strong recommendation for valuation of ecosystem services, their accounting and monitoring in long run. Then we had a National Forestry Commission, because this background will help me to actually demonstrate the cases which were done. A Forestry Commission was established for the first time in the country. We never have had Forestry Commission. We did have Finance Commission, a couple of other commissions for central, state, but for the first time in the country, this commission was established to again study the sector in a comprehensive manner. The overall sector's reforms were actually suggested by the Forestry Commission, which was again based upon hugely consultative process throughout the country. And it again, we were part of writing a chapter for which again focused, which again stressed a lot on doing valuation and accounting and setting up a mechanism of compensation and rewards for ecosystem services. Then ministry also then set up a committee after this CLEV instrument came into being to work out the net present value of forest when it is being diverted. The Finance Commission, which had been doing allocation of extra budgetary allocation of budget in the past based upon some formulas that they created, never have had environmental issues as their concern for allocation of budgets. Became aware for the first time through 12th Finance Commission, they allocated, though a lump sum budget, but at least a beginning was made. Then we were assigned a study, which I will share here, in the 13th Finance Commission to work out a specific mechanism based upon total economic valuation approach, opportunity cost approach, and correction cost approach to demonstrate the real contribution of these states and accordingly compensating them for their contribution. We also have, all of us actually have to have a national action plan for climate change, which we We prepared this plan in 2009, and it has 8 missions under it. And the very first such mission on which I'll be focusing more on Himalayan states, which came into existence, was finalized, was the National Mission for Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystems. They're unique in nature. They have got glaciers, they've got plethora of biodiversity, both floral and faunal biodiversity. They are the water towers in the country and have to be managed, have to be given first such preference in terms of managing ecosystems. And there's a huge dependence of people on these ecosystems in terms of their livelihoods. They also contain plethora of knowledge with them. They have very good traditional mechanisms of conserving natural resources. So why not actually scale up such an activity, replicate such that the whole country can benefit out of it. Then we also had a mission on Green India. As I said, we were to achieve this ambitious target, and without putting it into mission mode, it wasn't possible. So that's how active things have happened, and there's a huge change in terms of thinking, mindset of policymakers and politicians. And I have put up some actually newspaper clippings, which will not be very clear here, but just look at this one. It says common sense. The commons in the state of Himachal Pradesh, in which we have been working for past 12, 13 years, are providing huge benefits. When you conserve privately, a lot of public goods come into being. It says that it provides benefits to regional economies, national economy, to international economy. Why not actually we should get carbon credits or some compensation in exchange of our contribution? And you wouldn't believe, we not just did the study, we made it a point to actually canvass, campaign, communicate, let everybody know about this value. And it did make the difference. Of course, when an economist stands up, he or she is notorious for putting numbers on whatever exists on earth, but I think that makes sense. Unless until we convert things into dollar and rupee value, not all, few things can't be converted, but many things can be. We understand this language the best, and that's what we try to convey to policymakers, politicians, and you would not believe the administrators of Himachal Pradesh state, the chief ministers have numbers counted on their tips. They remember them by heart. You just ask them, they will give you numbers about value of forest in Himachal Pradesh. And they are doing many efforts, and the very first such project of carbon credits has come into being. It has come in the state of Himachal Pradesh. Then a very, very progressive and administrator of Himachal Pradesh actually could understand our study, and he was the one who implemented this CLEV instrument in the process. There was Director of Planning Commission, again a very dynamic person, and he somehow learned this Brazilian model of compensating the municipalities for conserving their resources. And he was the one who gave this statement, give cash if you want us to remain green. So that's what also happened in the bureaucratic circles. Then Himachal to become first carbon-free state. This is the first state to put ban on plastic use in the state, one of the most clean states of the country. Similarly, state of Maharashtra has put in green ideas to have good blueprint. So they also talk about putting environmental tax in the state for, which can be used for the purpose of afforestation, for cleaning the environmental pollution. And that's how things have been changing considerably in the country. Coming down to the specific discussion on cases on forest ecosystem services, I think one would be aware about this kind of a classification given by Millennium Ecosystem Assessment on forest ecosystem services, where we classify them into 4 categories, rather 3 to begin with. Provisioning, which we directly use for the purpose of consumption and production. Regulating are more kind of control mechanisms to have more or less of activities like soil conservation, protection, availability of water, nutrient, conservation, visual quality of environment, and so on. And cultural are the ones which again are gaining a lot of importance in the entire world, are the aesthetic, artistic, spiritual, historic, scientific, inspirational, and of course recreational values. And at the backstage are the supporting services. Because of them, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services actually come into being. Interesting tree given by FAO regarding forest ecosystem services. In Indian context, as I was just mentioning you, we have 23.4% of area's geographical area and 21.05%. It's a recent estimate. The report has just come out 2 weeks back by the Forest Survey of India, the agency which actually captures this data, does aerial surveys and uses GIS and also does ground truthing. and 23.8% is tree and forest cover in the country. We have dense forest area, which is 12.5% of tree and forest cover in the country. We have 16 forest types, and which are actually major groups. Within that, we have got 178 subtypes of forest. This is the data regarding forest type-wise forest cover in India, which is again a recent data of 16. We have very enriched biodiversity across the country, whether you're Himalayan belt or Western Ghats or the desert, the dry desert area, the warm desert area, the cold desert area, the mangroves, you name it. India is more like a continent, not like a country, because it's such a diverse country of, having things with each other. I'll be discussing with you some cases of Indian Himalayan region, where almost 12 states, there are 10 states, and 2 states have some hilly areas which come under the Himalayan belt. This is just a clipping of the areas in which we have been doing intensive work. Himachal Pradesh, they are known for their regulating services provisioning, cultural services, and of course provisioning services. State of Himachal Pradesh, state of Meghalaya, which has the highest rainfall spots in the world, Cherrapunji and Mawsynram, and you would not believe they are the drought-affected regions because water does not remain there. It just falls away, and because forests have been completely denuded in these areas, and there's no watershed as such available to contain water. We have Sikkim, where again we have been doing a lot of work. It's the highest orchid producing, that I have large number of more than 250 varieties of orchids are being found in this particular state. State of Uttarakhand. Madhya Pradesh is a plain state. I have purposely put this for purpose of comparison. It is the richest in terms of forest and tree cover, has got highest number of tiger reserves in the country, and also the diamond mining is being done in the country, and is an abode of vultures as well. One of the national parks has got huge vulture abode itself. This figure would be definitely known to you. Why does it make sense to invest in natural capital, especially forest capital? A very interesting work was done by Pawan Sukhdev, who was the study leader of TEEP International study, and his colleague Haripriya Gundimeda. A very interesting term is rather coined by them, which is a very catchy and very, very expressive term. It says that there is a strong connect between ecosystems and poverty reduction. And they try to work out, and it depends upon what you extract from ecosystem and what you contribute to the GDP of the country. GDPs of various countries, and especially I'm talking more about India, is mostly constituted by the industrial sector, now more by the service sector, some part by the agriculture sector, and forest gets clubbed with agriculture and allied activities. But if you separate the GDP of people who are the marginalized populations, communities, who are the poor communities, if you look at their GDP, they mostly get the GDP from ecosystems. That's why we need to conserve, we need to involve people in conservation process such that the dependence which is there can continue, they can get enough amount of benefits from these ecosystems, and we are able to actually manage their GDP in perpetuity. We have learned a lot from, I need not have to tell you about the New York case. We learned a lot about this particular case of investing in ecological infrastructure versus investing in the man-made infrastructure, and that's what we are trying to implement in India as well. The Avior case of France, where again people in the watersheds are being incentivized for conservation, and that's how you get the best bottled water in the world. We have learned a lot from the Brazilian case, where again the municipalities conserving forest, conserving their natural resources, water resources, managing their solid wastes well, are being compensated for their efforts, and we are also trying to implement this kind of process in the country. The Indian case, the very first case which I mentioned in the very beginning, was the case of Himachal Pradesh state. We're using, of course, we have learned a lot, rather we started learning about valuation from Bob's studies, and we've been using extensively his work, learning a lot from the process. Because I said, it's very essential to communicate what you are doing, what you're trying to express through valuation, because we do non-monetary valuation as well. But many a times it is important to communicate through monetary valuation exercise. And we did that very first study where we combined together all kinds of benefits together. And forest is as you would be aware, is a very interesting resource where it is difficult to demarcate between stock and flows. Whatever is stock is also flow value. So it becomes very difficult to separate out the stock from the flows and flows from stock. we made an attempt to work out whole set of values. We started with the growing stock value. Suppose the entire forest is being cut, what would you earn from that? And if you keep this forest intact, not selling trees, you're selling actually forest, you get direct benefits, indirect benefits, and we tried to capture all these values. You would not believe what was shown in the accounting statistics as a minuscule contribution, just 5% contribution to the GDP of Himachal state went up to 92%. We don't claim precision in the work because there was a lot of overlapping. It was all quick munching of numbers, but at least it gave some insight into the contribution of the sector in the overall economic system or GDP of the state. And as I said, we made it a point not just to actually end the process by doing this exercise. It was a part of the larger work on Himachal Pradesh state reforms process. It was a very progressive state. For the first time in any state in the country, the reforms process was done. And it started with the stakeholders' participation exercise, stakeholders' analysis, reviewing the policy, trying to work out the economic and legal framework also for affecting the entire policy in the system. And as a part of that process, we conducted this valuation exercise. And the entire team made it a point to actually convey, we worked with IIED and DFID in this particular project, to the entire state, to the center, to the ministers, to the legislatures, to policymakers, to practitioners. And eventually it clicked, and this particular instrument was introduced in the state for the purpose of diversion of resources. This is how we worked out, as I said. Then we also realized that one should not always work in a project mode to work out these values. There should be some kind of a simple mechanism, tool be available with the ultimate person who has actually captured this number on the field. So we developed a very simple toolkit for Central Statistical Organization for the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in the country. And this is, I'll not discuss that, it's in the slide, but I was just wanting to convey that we tried to work out a simple calculator to work out these values using the existing data, because every time, this so happens many times we start creating the data from the base. But already we do have lots of databases, lots of sources are there, so we must actually make use of those sources. So we connected with that as well as using the benefits transfer approach. In some cases where such data were not available, we combined things together to work out this simple tool. Then we used Bob's study to also demonstrate the contribution of Uttarakhand state. We did a project for the Hendrik Bohl Foundation and used his estimates for tropical forests of the world and did simple benefits transfer approach adjusting to the prices. And we were surprised that there was a huge increase in terms of contribution by forest ecosystems in the state's GDP. And state has been using it for various purposes, for making a case of carbon, making a case of RED+, making a case for the Finance Commission. And in many ways, the study has been very, very useful for the policymakers. We did a small site, a micro-catchment work with IIED, DFID, and Winrock International and a couple of organizations to start establishing so-called incentive-based mechanisms. Here only we got this response that we should not use this word payment, we should use the word incentive-based mechanism. It was 3-layered study, there was a huge altitudinal level drop from top to the bottom. We selected 3 villages, one from the top, one in the middle, one at the bottom of the catchment area, the watershed. And a negotiation process was set up by an NGO between upstream, downstream, and the middle level villages. And the upstream villages actually constrained their forest extraction. And that's what the message here is, that not always, when we say PS, is to be done in terms of cash payment. It can be in terms of kind, it can be in terms of labor contribution, it can be in terms of awarding you some kind of developmental project or developmental activities, setting up a school or constructing a community building, setting up a road, constructing water distribution, can be anything. Not always people have this mindset of receiving something in cash. So we did this, so we demonstrated it through the tool of livelihoods economics. How conserving upstream will make a difference in the livelihoods of not just the downstream people, because they will get continuous supply of water, but will make a difference in terms of available grasses to the upstream people. The middle level village will also get lots of benefits, and downstream now not just have water for their own consumption, but also have water enough for distribution and developing market mechanism. This is a case of Maflong sacred grove in the country, in the Meghalaya state, which was actually developed by Community Forestry International along with the university over there. And they captured this is a cultural value, extension of cultural value into biodiversity value, watershed value, and the carbon value. And they're trying to develop a mechanism in the international market process. The last, which I would discuss here, is the case of 13th Finance Commission. That's what we've been watching. The states which have got huge capability otherwise of generating revenue were constrained through the policy, through the order of Supreme Court to keep large areas under forest and tree cover. But there was no mechanism of compensating and rewarding these states. So you were asked to work out for the first time, there were terms of reference to the Finance Commission regarding ecology and environmental conservation of the states or the entire country rather. And we did this work under the 13th Finance Commission. And we tried to work out using 3 approaches: the total economic valuation approach, the opportunity cost approach, and the restoration cost approach. How much would be required should be required to compensate states who are conserving large areas under forest and tree cover areas. So this was ultimate objective was to strengthen environmental fiscal federalism in the country, because it was not based upon environmental values earlier, but for the first time they internalized these economic valuation exercise and allocation of their budgets to the states. So we were asked to do the whole range of calculations, give them estimates, guesstimates, a national figure, a separate figure for hilly states, separate figure for plain states, because they are different in terms of their ecology and different in terms of contribution of their values. So we used a couple of scenarios. We began with Bob's study. We began with work which we had done for Himachal State. We began with work which GIST has done. You would be aware of Pawan's organization, Green India State Trust, which tries to do green accounting in the country. There was an NPV committee in the country, their estimates. And then we extracted different methodologies from these studies to have a common methodology and found huge area of contribution being made by states' forest into states' economy as well as national economy. This is a spread of the values of provisioning services, regulating services, recreation services. State-wise forest stock value actually differs in terms of its value when you start capturing in terms of its contribution towards conservation and its contribution towards provisioning of various kinds of ecosystem services. And we found ultimately that regulating services have higher value than provisioning services, but they were not captured so far in the process earlier. There has been increasing economic value of provisioning services with decreasing forest cover, which looks very contradictory, but it is the scarcity value which comes into being when forests actually deplete. And the existing forests command much larger price as compared to the tree, when forests are actually decreasing and depleting. Low recreational value for northeastern states of the country, where they have got typical chicken neck problem of connectivity with the rest of the economic system, but they've got huge scope for developing these sites for landscape value or landscape beauty purposes. And higher timber stock in the southern state. And we suggested, a formula to them, and we also worked out, based upon the economic values, the allocation amongst different states. And through consultative process, we did thorough consultation for about 2 years. It was project actually ran. And we took the perceptions of all kinds of stakeholders together, and we were also asked to give a number. It ranged from 5,000 crores to 25,000 crores in Indian currency. And it actually eventually affected the allocation of grant, which used to be $203 million in the 12th Finance Commission. Based upon the study, it rose to $115 million. And if you look at the last 2 columns, if you compare the values, what we suggested and what was actually given, there's hardly much difference between the two. So valuation did actually make the difference, and eventually allocation was done based upon the valuation exercise. This is our contribution. We have come out with a toolkit for regulating services valuation with Pushpam Kumar, who works with UNEP, Nairobi as Chief of Ecosystem Services, with faculty in University of Liverpool, Mike Woods, and one of my students. A couple of other projects that we have done. These are the reports available. Some are available online. Others can be sent on request. And this is my contact address. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you. We have time for questions. If you come up to the microphone. And While you're doing that, I'll make a plug for a conference that we're going to be holding here in Portland, the end of July, beginning of August, of the Ecosystem Services Partnership. I'm going to pass around some flyers on this, and so if you're interested in this topic of ecosystem services, please plan to attend. Can you pass that around? There's also a new journal that's coming out that's associated with this Ecosystem Services Partnership, so if you have some ideas for papers on this topic, you might think of this new journal. Okay. Questions? Go up to the microphone.
Hey, thanks for the talk. It was really great. Would you happen to know if the prevalence of disease has gone down due to, the preservation of, forests, et cetera, in local and rural communities? Would you happen to know any of the stuff? I was just wondering.
Yeah, there are studies which are going on, and they have proved that where you have much stronger forest ecosystem, there are less incidence of diseases. Yeah, there are studies available. If you can log on to ICFRE's website, okay. The Indian Council for Forestry Research and Education in Dehradun, they have been conducting these kinds of studies, and there are outputs available.
Thanks.
Other questions?
So I'm wondering, my name is Vivek, we'll be meeting tomorrow to talk. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about taking measurements of ecosystem services and techniques of ecosystem services that have been applied in one context and transferring them to another context, and some of the implications of doing that kind of transfer, and then any kind of limitations that might create, or any kind of opportunities that might offer as well.
Yeah, we have. That's what I was trying to convey. We had a net present value committee set up by the Supreme Court of India, and a kind of mechanism was worked out to actually for compensating for forest diversion. It was talking more about the diversion cases, not talking much about the conservation issues. And that too, the methodology was very generic in nature. And just now, in fact, we would like to take Bob's help in our study. We have been commissioned by the Ministry of Environment and Forest to work out this methodology across different forest types, different forest densities, different altitudinal levels. So a lot of sort of crisscrossing needs to be done to give exact methodology. Otherwise, it becomes a general methodology. You might put an overestimate sometimes, you might underestimate some other time. So it has to be very site-specific, and you must take care of the diversity of forest, species richness, its altitudinal location, dependence of people for the livelihoods purposes. Like we are doing a project with EASA in Austria on forest carbon modeling. Conventionally, it is thought that the carbon value is the resultant of how well you manage your forest in terms of mensuration practices and silvicultural practices. But the huge, impact also comes on account of your own policy climate, in terms of, ecological changes which might happen on natural course, in terms of the pressures which come on account of dependence of people on those forests. So everything has to be factored into the process so as to work out this value. So it is a great challenge, but it has to be done like that. You must have techniques available, or the kind of a toolkit where you can actually combine factors together and use typical methodology to take care of site-specific factors and accordingly suggest the valuation methods.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right. One more.
Thank you for a good presentation. So my question's about looking at some of those newspaper articles. It seemed to me that part of this payment for ecosystem services, one of the problems that come up in this literature is, are you actually paying to protect services that would, in any case, have been protected? Right? So how do you handle for this in such a scenario? Are you actually paying to prevent something that would have been converted to prevent that from being converted, or are you effectively paying for things that in any case would have been preserved? Is that an issue that you deal with? And if it is, how do you deal with that?
Well, thank you. It's a good question, and that's what actually we tried to explore through our Finance Commission work. We realized that there's a huge mandate available in front of Forest Department. They achieve many things. There's a huge pressure coming from the tiger habitats. And it's so happening that within the sector, if you look at the allocation of budget, they tend to be quite centric towards few issues. It's not that biodiversity exists within the conserved habitat or the national park or the sanctuary area. There's a lot of biodiversity outside those areas. There was no at all, thought process about how to conserve those areas as well. So and then, as I say, that ultimate target is of 33% forest and tree cover, conserving your tiger population, conserving your other biodiversity, floral and faunal biodiversity in the country. There's not enough available. There's a typical constraint, fiscal constraint faced by the sector. And then you have another pressure on you to, in terms of ban on green felling. So how it's so difficult. It's quite contrasting with each other. So how to reconcile this? You have to generate good amount of conservation finance for that particular purpose, and then demonstrating to people in terms of connect that you establish. When you conserve these habitats, you get so much amount of ecosystem services available, which we demonstrated through a small micro-watershed study, which can be definitely scaled up, can be replicated, but as the question says, it has to be site-specific. We can't mindlessly or uniformly or in a blanket manner, we can multiply that intervention. So for both the purposes, for actually checking degradation and for enhancing the forest stock, for both the purposes, we need to generate enough amount of finance. And when you establish this connect very well, then people able to understand. Let me just take a minute to explain a very interesting experience in Sri Lanka. I think many of you would have seen this. I was visiting Sri Lanka many years ago, and I'm quoting from your own country. In Colombo city, I was very much surprised to see it is a developing country. It looks more like a European city. Every so-called the municipal block of Colombo city has got a huge blackboard and tells you how your municipal tax is progressing. It tells you what you contribute to the government in terms of taxes of various kinds, how they are being invested back in your own conservancy, how they are being used by the other conservancy. So any amount of rise in tax will not actually disturb people. Otherwise, if you put any tax in the system, and since you don't know where a tax is actually landing up, you will not accept to pay that tax. We have RTI in India now, the Right to Information Act. Why should you have to have that? If everything is transparent, which is one of the, I think, qualifying conditions for setting up market mechanisms of PES, you should be able to demonstrate what you're going to contribute and how you're going to contribute. So if that kind of system is being set, I think it becomes much easy process to generate enough amount of conservation and environmental finance in the system.
Okay, thank you very much, and let's thank Madhu again for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
And again, she will be around for a few months, so if you have other questions or would like to talk with her further, stop over to the Institute.
Surely, you're most welcome.